Chapter 4. Much like the selection of cuisine for a social reception, the choice of invited guests could be the difference between an evening of meaningless niceties and pertinent discussion. For all intents and purposes, a birthday could be considered a normal and customary excuse for celebration. However, when the birthday boy is Vasyl Bogdanov, the deputy head of Ukrainian intelligence, the opportunity for a get-together could not be missed, even if it was under the guise of a surprise. He had not known Vasyl for very long, and to say that he knew him well would be somewhat of a fallacy. Having only learnt of his date of birth a few days prior, Francis had had to arrange the event in an almighty rush, although this ran against the grain of how he liked to do things. He made an exception in the hope of seizing upon the opportunity to raise some issues off the record. Masking the plan under a facade of misdirection was a necessity when trying to gull an intelligence official to his residence for a party in his honour. He had been rather pleased and somewhat surprised with the quick and positive response to the invitation that he had received from Vasyl. Contrary to advice from the embassy, he had opted not to have a security detail at his house for the party. The invitation list had caused some raised eyebrows, but Francis thought that security personnel at the house would be over the top for what, for all intents and purposes, was a surprise birthday party. Hearing the electric gate opening next door at the German ambassador's residence awoke Francis from his pensive state. As he stood at the window, gazing out into the rapidly diminishing light, swinging round to look at the condition of the hall, he was pleased at the job which had been done by the catering staff. They were still finishing off some odds and ends, but Vasyl was not due to arrive for at least another hour and a half. The open window let in a faint but distinct crunching of gravel in the distance. The guests, who had just parked next door, were slowly making their way up the driveway. Hopefully, all of the guests would have arrived before Vasyl made an appearance. Francis waited patiently by the window to see who would emerge from around the corner of the thick shrubbery. The darkness made it very difficult to discern who it was that had arrived, but it was a small group of 4 people, each carrying a small item in their hands. "Melissa, the first guests are arriving. Have you seen to the kids?" he asked, standing at the foot of the stairway. "I'm just coming down, 1 minute," she replied. A firm knock on the door from just behind Francis made him start. For some reason he had been expecting the doorbell, but the knock had caught him off guard. Sliding the latch across and pulling open the heavy beechwood door, Francis was greeted by 4 familiar, smiling faces. "Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. I hope we aren't too early again," joked the first face with a somewhat humorous undertone. Stepping aside, Francis allowed them to enter. "Mark, I just wish that all of my guests were as punctual. Please come in, make yourselves at home, and find a good hiding place." "I hope you like surprises," quipped Mark. Slowly closing the door behind them as they walked into the hallway, Francis felt the bitterness of the cold outside and hoped that all the guests arrived before the inevitable snowstorm began. He had checked the weather online earlier, and the forecast was for very heavy snowfall, which was expected to last the whole evening. Francis had a brief titter under his breath as something humorous crossed his mind, the realization that just as he stood there in the hall worrying about all the guests arriving before the storm, he had not stopped to consider whether they would be able to leave afterwards. The residence stood on a gentle incline, and a short distance down the road the gradient took a turn for the steep. This, in conjunction with the almost non-existent salting and gritting of the roads leading back to the city, had led to several occasions when leaving the house was simply out of the question for a few days. The view of the capital city, Sofia, during clear days, at most times of the year, was much more than impressive, but the price of living in the foothills of the mountain Vitosha was paid during the winter months. Having had their coats and jackets taken from them by the catering staff, Francis's colleagues from the embassy soon sunk into the comfortable brown leather sofas in the corner. However, they were quickly to their feet when he walked into the hall and strode towards them. I trust you ladies and gentlemen had a none too taxing day at the office? Probably slightly more taxing than your day, Francis, quipped Winston, a senior diplomat. You've been at the snacks already. Quickly passing his hand over his mouth, Francis felt the light brush of a treacherous crumb remnant on his index finger, which had given him away. You are lucky that there are any left. As a matter of fact, I had a major furnishing issue today, grinned the ambassador. Don't ask. Okay, I won't, but I will say cheers to us all for having survived out here for another year. Winston raised his glass, and the sound of crystal gently colliding reverberated around the room. Francis, do you know much about this Vasile character? I heard that he was only staying here in Sofia for the next couple of days. Are you sure that he'll turn up here tonight? He will be here. Hi, my name's Antony Botting, and I'm the author of the Pebble in the Dark trilogy. If you'd like to hear more of this story, please subscribe to this channel and ring the bell below. See you next time.